Welcome to this episode of the Dropout Multi-Millionaire Podcast, where we talk about tactical business strategy, building high-performance sales teams, and growing your business. If you're ready to break free from the status quo and join the ranks of the Mavericks, the Rebels, and the Renegades who refuse to conform and instead build multi-million-dollar businesses, then buckle up, because here we go. And we're back with the Dropout Multi-Millionaire Podcast. And today I'm excited. We got Jamal Marshall with us. I was actually on his podcast a couple of weeks ago. I think it's coming out here shortly. And it was so good, I asked him if he'd come back on mine. So that doesn't happen a lot. So that should tell you the quality of the individual we're about to talk to. So with that, Jamal, how the heck are you today?
Man, I'm amazing, bro. It's a freezing day over here in Washington, D.C., but plenty to do on home front, plenty to do on work front, and I'm just excited to have a poster, man.
I don't know how it is in Washington, D.C., but I was in Washington State yesterday. I was in Seattle. I flew in last night. I think my flight was delayed over and over and over. I finally rolled in this morning about 2 a.m. And it's cold out there. In fact, funny story, we were flying out to Seattle 2 days earlier, and apparently somewhere up there around the Canada border is a town called Keister. Now, where I'm from, Keister has a meaning. And I looked at my map and it said, it's negative 14 in Keister. And I was like, ooh, that doesn't sound good.
Bro,
I
it's just that time of the
snapshotted that
year.
on my phone.
The fact that you're this bright-eyed and bushy-tailed says a lot about your work, so I'm excited to get into this with you, man.
Oh, shoot. So anyway, here's what I want to do. I want you to enlighten our audience. Tell me your story. Where'd you start? How'd you get here? And what are you doing today? And I'm going to sit back and drink some water and listen. Rock and roll, my friend.
Let's go. Well, funny thing is, you say you're in Washington, so I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. So that's where I was born in the great year of 1984, same year that the Transformers became a cartoon. Yes, super nerd here.
And that is how
So
you identify the timeline in your life. You know, I
that's
was
it.
born when the Transformers became a cartoon.
So I'm the youngest of four, and the second youngest, from my dad's second marriage. Um, and so growing up, I really was pretty sheltered, pretty protected, really wasn't aware of a whole lot. It wasn't until we came here as a family in '89 to Washington, D.C., till I realized there were some issues going on at home. It was around the time when I was about 6.5, maybe 7 years old, where I said, okay, my dad has some problems. I didn't know what alcohol was. I didn't know what drugs was. I mean, I was a kid. I didn't have the bandwidth to interpret such. And the older I got, I would say probably around like maybe 8.5, 9, we began to be very distant from one another. He could be very abusive, physically and verbally, very unpredictable, especially when he was high. So his drug of choice was any alcohol he could get his hands on, and heroin and crack cocaine.
Wow, that
So
is rough.
it was rough. It made home very unpredictable. It made him very hard to figure out. Um, and the rejection from him, especially being his only boy, I couldn't figure it out, So I was always trying to figure out, well, how do I please him? How do I make him happy? How do I keep him off edge?
Mhm.
And those things developed into everything had to be excellent because you don't want to set him off. Because if he set off, he was very strong when I was younger. It was just hard to get away from him or to figure out the night's going to be very unpredictable.
Mhm.
Um, and because I had such a fear of a rejection and things were so unpredictable on home front, many times I was told, okay, we always knew where he was. He always provided. We never lacked. We never went without. So he was a functioning drug addict, which was kind of crazy.
Mhm.
Um, but there were some seasons, very short, maybe a week at a time, where he would be away, and it's like, okay, you have to be the man of the house. And so I learned early on how to be the surrogate spouse, how to be, even though I was the youngest, how to be like the brother who was the shoulder to lean on. And so you grow up a little quicker than you're supposed to. And then outside the house, I learned straight A's. You know, I've never been super athletic. I've semi athletic, but do what you can to make the team look good.
Mhm.
Um, and as a worker, the way that manifested it was in being the first to show up and the last to leave. So I was always, excellent, outstanding on every performance appraisal. Was able to network, knew everyone on staff, could kind of match tempo and match pace with anyone. So I was the quintessential, oh, he's the dream guy, he's the
Hmm.
one you
Yep.
want. Um, but inside, Brian, I was dying, Barrow. I was dying, man. Because I didn't have a voice of my own. What seemed like excellence outwardly and what seems like in today's market they call high performance was just a trauma response for me. And it followed me personally, professionally. It made its way into every facet of my life. Um, I at I would say around 1920, I started getting serious about my faith. My mom, she had became a Christian in 86.
Hmm.
So to me, and I always say she's the fourth member of the Trinity. But dad was mean enough to be Satan himself. So, I kind of was torn between like what is right, what's wrong, what's moral, what's whatever. And I did the, regular high school thing. I drank, I smoke, I was promiscuous. But around like 19, I decided like, well, maybe I want to take this faith thing serious. The drinking and the smoking, that stopped. And the going to hotels and the promiscuous activity and parties, that stopped. All the outward things. But I said, well, I needed a coping mechanism. I needed an outlet for what was going on inside. So I chose to abuse internet pornography. Um, it was more hidden, and it still provided the same amount of dopamine, but it didn't at least outwardly look like, oh, I wasn't a good Christian boy. Because remember, everything I did
Right.
had to be excellent.
Yep.
So you fast forward to, you know, my job. I started my career, professional career, at the Department of Justice. At this time, I was at Reach University as a counseling and psych major. How'd that happen? Growing up, I always had friends that were twice my age.
Hmm.
I had a lot of friends that were my age that I could get along with, but as far as hold a conversation, I found them airheaded. It's a weird thing. I'm not an arrogant, mean-spirited person, you know me, but I just felt like I can't
Right.
really hold it. I can play sports and tag and do stuff with these people, but as far as a intellectual conversation, I like the older folks better.
Right.
And they would bring me actual problems that I could solve. Like I solved people problems. I didn't realize that. And I think because I've been doing it since I was little, it was just in me.
Right. Right.
Um, and so people would ask me, are you a counseling or psychology major? That's kind of my major found me. I didn't exactly want it.
Right.
Um, and a strange thing happened in human resources with my paperwork. I was at that time when you came in as a student worker, you could, work a full-time job, but then you went to co-op, which kind of groomed you or dressed you up to become a full-time employee. And in the justice system, you typically went out to the field. So I was supposed to go out to the field and do the co-op, but something happened with my paperwork in HR where it didn't get pushed to the right place. And so when I graduated, I GS'd myself to the highest position. And so I worked myself out of a job. And this was in 2009. Um, and so they couldn't believe that I wasn't going to be staying there because I was like this was I was the only young black dude on the director's floor at
Hmm.
the DLJ.
Right.
Um, and inside, I was a little like, man, I've done this for 6 years. I've been like busting my tail here. I didn't realize that that was, God's way of saying, before you become any sort of person that's going to help a lot of people, you need to actually go and get some help yourself. And that's when I found out about just some inpatient counseling happening in the Midwest, and I chose to go for it. I had so much hatred, bitterness, darkness, so many unhealthy outlets that no one knew about internally. And so I used all my annual leave that I hadn't used when I was working there to go away for 7 months. So when I tell people
Wow.
about making the investment, of money and making the investment of time, it's something I've done. You know, we have a lot
What?
of, since
Okay, I'm going to
COVID, we have
interject. Why 7 months? Is that because you weren't ready to leave before then, or that was the length of the program? How'd the 7 months play in?
that was like the minimal length of the program. And their
Oh,
whole
wow.
thing was just with all the mindsets and the stuff that I was in, you didn't get this way overnight. And so these things won't be resolved overnight. And I found that it took about, for me, at least that amount of time. I've been functioning, in a sense, even though it wasn't alcoholism, I was like a functioning alcoholic in a different way for so long. And so if you think about the patterns, it's a phrase I've coined. It says a pattern remains a pattern until you disrupt it. Something
Hmm.
I've trademarked. I had to go in and disrupt the neural pathways and the ruts that have been dug in my brain physically, socially, psychologically, and spiritually. Um, and so even when I do marketing, I encourage people to invest. It's nothing I haven't done myself. somebody saying invest in my business, but you spent $2 on it. That's not the case
Right.
here.
Right.
I've done the hard work. Um, and then towards the end, my counselor had asked me, actually at 3 months, he asked me, he said, "Hey, do you ever thought about doing an internship here?" And my response, being from a major city in a melting pot, I was like, not a lot of black people around here. So I said, I don't know. This was in like northern Kentucky. So I was just like,
But they
yeah,
got a lot of
thanks,
Jim
man.
Beam.
It was like, this is I don't know, bro. And I didn't realize it towards the end that that's what I was supposed to do. So I applied. I
Interesting.
didn't actually think I would get in, and they accepted my application. And so that was 6 extra months on top of my
Wow.
counseling
So now you're
that I
13
had.
months.
Yeah, 13 months total. But in between that time, I flew back here, and it was weird. I got to backtrack. My dad in 2006 had come in the house. And I mean, he was spit drunk, eyes bloodshot red. And I remember he fell to the floor in the hallway, and I got on the floor with him, and he told me about his childhood. And he told me about, him being the oldest of, a lot of different siblings. He was the third oldest, but he was the one at home, and he had to raise all of them. So he loved children. He just never knew how to show love because he was forced to do that. And my paternal grandfather was a very successful entrepreneur, owned a bread shop, but he left my grandmother and my father nothing. And my
Hmm.
grandmother said, that guy who you see at the bread shop every day, that's your dad. That's how he found out who my grandfather was.
Oh,
And when he got older, as a preteen, they were in a heated argument. And he told my dad, "Yeah, I paid your grandmother to abort you, but she wouldn't." So he hated his father. And early
wow.
on, subconsciously, I hated him. And I was like, man, the buck stops here. And so him sharing that with me, it wasn't like everything, the anger in me went away, but it endeared me to him. And I said, "Hey, man, can you just go to church with us tomorrow?" This was on Saturday. And he
Right.
went and he talked to our former pastor back then, and he gave his life to Christ, man. And I know people may have, I have clients from a myriad of beliefs: agnostic, atheist, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, you name it. But I literally watched him change, but
Did
I
it stick?
still had that thing from so many years in me. And so there was a lot of parts of me that needed to change. So, but when I came back home from the 13 months, by this time it was 2010 in July, I remember us spending his birthday together. And then the last day before I came back, we went out to PG track. We walked the track together, and then we sat down, and I was telling him all these things that I never told him before, some shameful stuff I had done, some things he already knew, some stuff I was into and had gotten into. And I remember him saying, "Man, I can't judge you. That's God's job. I just am here to support you and love you." And I never thought I would hear my father say those words to me.
Hmm.
And for years, we had been worlds apart, and who I deemed my worst enemy became my best friend.
So
Um,
did his faith stick?
oh, stuck like crazy glue until he wasn't here anymore. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Um, and I went back, did the internship, and then they brought me on as a staff member, and that's when I began to I already had the major. I had graduated from Regent, but they started training me in the clinical and also training me in psychology, and counseling. So I did that for better part of 8 years.
In
Uh,
Kentucky, or you came back
yeah,
to DC? So you stayed in
nah,
Kentucky.
I stayed in Kentucky, stayed
You
in the
you turned
Midwest.
into a Kentucky boy.
I sure did.
Sure did.
The cool thing is I had family in Cincinnati. And I had outlets where I could get out of but I actually started to enjoy the open country air.
All
But it
right.
was even during that time, taking a full caseload of a myriad of different people from backgrounds, and then even and working with staff and staff changes, where I learned a lot about, boundaries. I learned a lot about, um, even knowing how to interact with CEOs, how to interact with board members in a way that
Hmm.
power positioned myself. Because as you can imagine, culturally, I wasn't raised in a very culturally charged household. Like we couldn't even. My mom was the type we couldn't even call white people white. That was considered racist. We had to say Caucasian. I was like, "Ma, that's so long." But working in the
Too many
Midwest,
words.
I know, with people from, not even so much people, like with a person from some different proclivities, you have to learn to carry yourself. And I said, I'm not here to dial it back, due to my brown skin. I'm here to dial it forward. And I said, we're going to learn to adjust to one another, and that's how it's going to be. And so those are the things that, you know, being one, at first there was four of us, and it went down to one. So
Mhm.
I was like the only dude. so I learned how to navigate that space in a way that helped me to prosper. Um, and then I was ready to
I'm just
resign.
curious. Did it did it only affect you because you felt that way internally, or do you think it affected you in any other way?
It wasn't something I felt. I mean, it was certain things, even things I would hear.
Okay. So
But
it was
the when
real.
I would hear those things, I would literally confront them right spot on in front of everybody, in front of the
Right.
staff. And so, people know my brand. They say, "Man, Jamal, you seem so direct." I said, "Yeah, I learned it. I learned it
Okay.
right in the crucible." And I learned how not to put up with anything. And I didn't get fired. I chose to resign and leave when I wanted. You teach people how to treat you. And if you look under my LinkedIn, teaching is my second highest rated endorsement. I love teaching lessons.
Good. Excellent. Cool. So that was 8 more years there, you said?
Yeah, that was 8 more years, and I resigned in 2017. Well, fast forward, Dad had a major stroke in January 2017, and one of my former clients, we end up being like best friends once they're done. And his dad was a pilot, and he would just get me. He said, "Anytime you need anything, you let me know." And he would just get me a bunch of standby flights. And so I found that I was pretty torn. I was coming back here to DC, just back and forth, um, because Dad had had a major stroke. We were really, really tight by that time. And I said, yeah, it's time for. I felt like I was doing what I loved. I was getting to go to London, travel, go to different places. I was
Mm-hmm.
speaking publicly. I started
Right.
teaching, promoting. I had a full load in counseling, doing what I was really, really made for. But also, I just also felt constricted, and I was like, I can't really build out, what I'm destined for here. I'm gonna be faithful with what is another man's, but it's time for me to go. And when Dad got sick, it became even more of a reality to me. Like, okay, I'm I need to be on home front. And so I resigned in September. When I got back, 3 days later, um, he got critically ill,
Mm-hmm.
and we lived in the hospital for 2.5 months. And December 5th, 2017, he transitioned out of this life into the next. So that was really difficult. I hated God. I hated Jesus. Hated everything I taught, everything I stood for. Um, all the families I had helped, I just not them. I just hated it all. And I went into a deep depression. I think it's weird that I have clients that are atheists and agnostic, and maybe they know somewhere deep down that I'm endeared to them because I wanted to be one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the faith that I lay claim to was shipwrecked. Um, and it took some time for for me to get deeper roots again because I had a lot of questions that I didn't have answers to.
So I'm
But
curious. I want to interject. So
go for it.
death of a parent is a natural part of life, right?
Hmm.
Like I have a brother who just lost one of their children. That's not a natural part of life, and it's devastating. So I, I think we understand that our parents are going to pass. That's obviously. So why did it affect you so much? Were you still in the high of I now have a relationship with this man that I hated when I was growing up and I don't want it to go away? Why did it so deeply affect you when in your mind you knew that that was going to happen at some point? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I like the way you frame that. I think it affected me the way it did is because we were like really tight for the better part of 11 years. I mean, I was 32 when this happened. This was back in 2017, but for more than 20 years, I didn't have him as a father, and I finally had him.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, now that I'm back home and I'm back in DC and I can see him more, like we can really build on this. And I feel like I never got that opportunity. So,
Okay.
and we had become like extremely tight. I mean, like, I love that man more than life itself. So you grieve hard because you love hard. So
Okay. Interesting. And were you married at this point?
no, I wasn't. So it was so much process, and I'm actually glad I wasn't because I don't know how I I was very raw. I would not have wanted to be around me in
Okay.
2018.
And were you working? Were you back working as a counselor in DC?
Yeah, I resigned, and there was always a plan. When you resign, you always have something lined up. So I was set to be a project manager at an independent website in Columbia, Pennsylvania. Uh, and while Dad was still alive in the hospital, I had gone up, did a test run, look at the office and everything like that. And I said, okay, what my living arrangements will be. And the CEO, he and I got together and he said, man, he's a person of faith who said, I think God may want you down there in DC in that fire a little bit longer. I think he could kind of detect I was still a little bit torn.
Mm-hmm.
Because when initially had talked, my father was in really good health, and next thing you know, he was like a month from dying. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I gave up, I had foregone that opportunity, and then I began to apply for, different jobs along the same line, but they weren't located within the DC area. So it's like, as me who doesn't mind traveling for work, I felt kind of a sense of duty, like, okay, I feel like I need to be here for a little bit longer. So I turned down a lot of opportunities, and I didn't see that it was actually working in my favor because I was like, man, how am I gonna make money? It's kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm.
My
It's weird.
bank
You
was
need
starting.
money. It's in it. We need
Yeah, I
money.
mean, but going from Kentucky to DC, you feel it quickly.
Yeah,
The cost
I
of
bet.
living is it's a huge quantum leap. And so I'd volunteered, doing some writing and promoting for a magazine. And I remember the CEO. I was out on this tennis court one day, and I was just praying. I was just like, God, I need $500. And later, he actually called me. He said, "Yo, it was on my heart to just write you a check for $500." I was like, how does that even happen?" And this book, a friend of mine, Rick, said it's a book called Anonymous. It's called Jesus' Hidden Years in Yours. He said, you need to get this book. He had told me this in 2014. I didn't get the book until 2018. I get this
Mm-hmm.
book brand new. I get to chapter 36. There's a crisp $100 bill in there. So like little stuff, like where I just needed to pay the bills. Like I just had enough to get by. Um, and I finally, landed a contract position at a place called International Justice Mission, working in advocacy and mobilization. It's not what I wanted to do, but it paid the bills.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able, through a contract position, to meet the head of the interns and fellows program. We had an interview for 5 minutes at a Starbucks while I was eating a croissant. She said, I want you to start in January. Um, Anytime I've had an interview, a person just meets me in 10 minutes. I've never done panel, I've never done second interview. They just
Right.
say that's the one I want on my team. And so that position would turn into an opportunity that I had for 4.5 years. And I had some opportunities here to use my gifts in mentoring, but I wasn't able to counsel, wasn't able to kind of take people through a process. It was what I had to do, but not what I wanted to do.
Right.
Um, but I was thankful for it. And it wasn't until around the pandemic. Um, I would video blog for a long time. I was never on social media, brand new to social media, but I always believed that Instagram was stupid. It's like, who cares about a picture of you? Like, why are you there? But what's the why behind the what? So I always did video, like always. And when my dad had passed, I used to go around this empty tennis court and I would just shout, the F word to heaven all day because that was my prayer. That's all I knew to say. I
Mm-hmm.
was very angry with God. And I said, well, deer and foxes and wild turkey don't speak English. So why don't I go in there and do that? And just kind of being enclosed in nature over the course of a year, God got a hold of me. So I would start praying again. And after I would pray, I would have like an idea that would come to me for like a minute and a half. And I would whip out my Google Pixel and I would just record my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward to 2020, we have a global pandemic. And then we have in the United States a cultural pandemic with that blew up all over the world, with a man getting, murdered on television.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt the desire to speak to it in a balanced way. There were people who were saying, okay, everything moving is racist. And then there were
Mm-hmm.
people saying there is no racism. I was like, well, I think there's a both and.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is a way to speak to this, especially living in a major city where people were rioting. It's like, I don't think that that's the way to resolve this. And so when everybody on LinkedIn, everyone used to sound the same. Everyone still sounds the same. Came in singing a soprano note. I came in as a tenor. People were like, "Who's this?"
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where Listen and Speak was born. People were just like, "Who's this guy?" Like walking through the woods, just having a conversation with me that's not talking about SEO and CRMs and
Right.
and
Right.
websites and crowdfunding. Like I didn't care about any of that stuff. I just wanted to express and share some thoughts. And lo and behold, I did that. I was faithful with that for the better part of 5 months until I started getting DMs, which I didn't know was an inbound lead. People were like, "Are you a counselor or like a speaker or something? Your name says global lead," because that's what I was doing. And I was like, "Well, I used to do that." And I remember someone said, "That's what you still are." I have a family member that needs your help, and I remember that was my first inbound lead in July of 2020.
Interesting.
And one of my mentors said, okay, Jamal, he says, you realize like this is who you really are. Like you have a full-time job, but this is who you really are. And so you need to develop a business acumen. And that's when I went and applied for the LLC. And then I started actually taking like some business coaching. But the funny thing is that group, the group that was in Pennsylvania, they had listened to a podcast that I was on, which was strange. Uh, a whole
Right.
group of 4 people called me and said, we want you to come on our podcast. And I was like, I was just a regular dude with a full-time job. It was the
Right. Right.
strangest thing. And they were in the Safety Justice League. And I said, I'll do it. And so the group in PA, launch kits, they got a hold of it. And they said, we're going to send you a couple of $1,000, get yourself a Apple MacBook, and we're going to give you a domain. You do what you want with it. So that's where Listen This Week was born.
Wow.
Then a mentor of mine, this very mic I'm talking on, he says, yeah, I heard your podcast. And so the female panelist asked you if you were a podcaster. You told her no, but she said you're a natural. And he said, I agree. So I'm gonna send you a mic. You need to actually get started on this. So I wasn't looking for Listen and Speak. It literally was looking for me. So
Interesting.
over the course of 4 years, I just started building and building and building, and more people would ask me to speak on different things. And then I had to learn, like, Jamal, you have a gift to speak. But when you speak to everyone, you speak to no one. You need to actually niche down your audience and speak to your people. And that's where someone came in my DMs that worked at LinkedIn, and they said, I'm part of an accelerator program, and I want you to apply. This was thousands of people who applied, and they
Right.
only picked 100. They actually picked me for the first inaugural LinkedIn Creator Accelerator program. And and that was a
Wow.
perfect storm for like my business, because that's right when, like, in the winter of 2021, where I really got serious, niche down, and just like really started like feeling like this is my message. And the more I did that, the more inbound leads started to come, more podcasting opportunities. It's just amazing. Like one thing led to another, man. So um
So did this
I
turn into a
still
full-time thing for you, or are you still working a
no,
regular
this
job? This is it.
that's funny you should ask. So the 20th of January last year was my last day working as a global lead in corporate. I remember talking to my manager. She said, how you doing? I said, I'm over it. She says, over it. I said, yeah. She said, I've really been blessed here, but I think it's time for me to move on. She says, well, I'd like for you to see if you could stay. I said, we'll see if we can find me something, but I'm kind of got my foot out the door. So
So how long from you got your mic till you walked out of your job and this is your life now? How long was that?
3.5 years.
3.5 years from zero to this is my life now.
So I saved up
Cool.
6 figures, living in DC of all places, got an LLC, developed a business acumen, put aside a savings account for that, made sure I hired some business coaches,
Yeah.
and also continue to build out my brand. Um, so yeah, I always say, have a plan, make sure you have a nest egg,
Right.
because we know entrepreneurship is a roller coaster. Sometimes you draw these big contracts and it's like, oh, that's a lot of money.
Right.
And then
Right.
sometimes it's like crickets. And
Right.
you got to learn how to navigate the wave that is entrepreneurship. But I'm doing what I love today, man.
And so this is what's brought you to today.
This is what's brought me to today. That was my long-winded answer for your audience.
All right. I got to dig into the business end of this story because I'm fascinated how you got to well, first tell me this. Who is your client? What do you do for them? What are they looking for?
My clients are typically executive leaders, six-figure earners, and they are the types that are in the business world. They either are in corporate, or they have a business on the side that they're developing, and they have had to be the social barometer for the friend group, the family, the work group. They're the ones who never say no. They're the quintessential
Okay.
people pleaser. They are the
Okay.
the the person, the man or woman of excellence. But they become that because they never say no.
Okay.
And even their excellence, they're self-aware enough to realize that this is a trauma response. It's like I'm burning a candle at ends that don't exist. And even getting to where I've actually left money on the table because I've allowed the reactions of others to inform my decisions.
So why are they coming to you? Explain this to me. So they found you online. How did they get to you? I mean, or what are they looking for when they say they call, hey Jamal, what are they looking for?
They've, yeah, they've seen the BetterHelp ads from YouTube. They've seen all the people that became coaches through the pandemic, and they see
Okay.
somebody who actually understands human behavior. I've been doing this for 16 plus years. I'm not
Okay.
new to this. I'm true to this. This is
Yeah.
something I've lived. This is something I've trained in. I'm also trained in the clinical, though I'm not a clinician. And they
Yeah.
say, okay, he actually knows what he's doing.
Right.
And they know I have skin in the game because this is a part of my life and not
Right.
just a part of a certification that I got through the pandemic because I got laid
Right.
off of a job, And they also see the results. So, I place my recommendation section on my website as well as on LinkedIn. It's okay, if that's what he's doing for people, I like to see what he can do for me.
So if you were talking, we'll probably get 4 or 5 thousand people that'll listen to this, right? What is the person looking for if they call you, or what is it that you're bringing to the conversation when you work with them? What are you solving?
Yeah. So the problem I'm solving with them is their clarity. We're actually
Okay.
digging to the subconscious of what they believe, which is going to inform how they behave. Just like I told you, I told you about my dad's more outward addictions. Most of
Hmm.
these people are addicted to what they do.
Okay.
But those addictions also manifest themselves. Like I had a client who we know now cannabis is legal.
Hmm.
Obviously, wine and alcohol is very legal once you're an adult, but it became an abuse and an outlet and a place for them to, pour their sorrows and their stresses at.
Right.
They had their own business. So when I got them, they only had one client. By the time I'd offboarded them, they had 12. But
Okay.
they actually had the clarity of mind and they were freed up to actually pursue and direct energy towards their business because it wasn't being wasted on those unhealthy outlets. But we had
Okay.
dealt with their subconscious belief. We dealt with, I say, I deal with you in threes: childhood you, teenage you, and adult you who was looking back like, what the has been going
Right.
on? That adult you has some questions. And, a coach is like a cheerleader. It's nothing wrong with that. But I think you actually need to isolate some root causes. And most therapists are just talk therapists. They're just listening to you spin about your problems. I actually give you homework and actually live in this 12-week season with you. It's either 3 months to 6 months, but there's a live document that I have running with my clients that we share. And so there's accountability metrics to measure your progress. So they're literally looking for somebody who's got the best of both worlds. Like they're like, I don't want a coach, and I'm not ready for a business coaches. I need to get right here first, and I don't want a therapist. I actually need someone who has an acumen for both coaching and the therapeutic and the clinical.
And you meet with them once a week?
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jamal, analyze me.
Talk
We've
to
had
me.
a lot of discussions, man. What do you see in me? I'm gonna put you on, this is real world stuff. What do you see?
I see a man who's a hardworking husband and father. I see someone based on a conversation we had, who did live for a long time in survival mode.
Yes.
Who knew, like, all right, there's no other way that the money's going to come unless I get this done. Now, my hope is that all that surviving hasn't spilled over into where you're always in survival mode and you're never taking and making the time to actually rest and rest your mind. Um,
Fascinating. And by the way, I'm divorced now. Uh, so divorced father. Yes. It's interesting you say that survival mode and never, because my brain never stops, literally. I'm the guy that wakes up at 3 in the morning, with 1,000 thoughts, like, and they just don't, and then you just lay there with your eyes open. I think that's part ADHD, but you might have a different take on that.
ADHD is a real thing. And for entrepreneurs, I think we both know from experience, ADHD can be a gift.
Oh, I,
And
I just did
so,
a reel on this week. It's my superpower.
yeah. And that's the thing is taking a person's what will be seen as a weakness and making it a superpower, but also taking your mind off autopilot and putting you on purpose. And sometimes that purpose is actually sectioning off and isolating fulfillment. Many people, we hear the word, the H word, a word that I'm okay with. I've made peace with the H word, but I can't stand it. Happiness. I'm like, okay, happiness is very different from fulfillment. And most people, you got Fortune 500 folks, they don't even know what fulfills them. You ask them that question, I'm like, don't give me a pat answer. Give me the
Hmm.
real answer.
Do
And
you know
so
what's
we
interesting
actually have
about
to.
that? I did an intensive with a guy out in Colorado,
Mhm.
and he works with a lot of high income guys because he's ridiculously expensive for what he does. And he said one of the most common things he hears is when from his clients who were, you know, executive CEOs, it's don't mess with my insecurities because my insecurities got me where I'm at because they drive me to do things that I wouldn't normally do. But it also is the source of your issues and your pain. So how do you balance that?
I think that's when we have to be willing to live in the tension of both and. And since it is both and, how do I thrive in the both and? And when we isolate the root causes of our subconscious and our thinking and our belief system, then we find a path forward. I love, man, like the clients on my caseload now. I love my clients, man. They're some rock stars, but it's hard work. I tell them, for the first 4 weeks, you might not like me, but know that I'm not taking you through this process to harm you. It's to arm you. And I get results.
And do you have people that quit on you?
No,
Hmm. So everybody's willing to go through the process. They don't get turned off. And
I had one person. This was 4 years ago. They quit at 6 weeks.
okay.
They quit and they completely ghosted. But the strange thing about them is that even when I got them, and that's something to think about business and think you and I can talk about this is you live and you learn. I don't even hold it against them.
Right.
It's difficult. It's some things that they needed to give up, to get where they were, where we're going to, these are the goals that we have in mind. And some of it was even relational. And it's like, if you're not ready, you're not ready. We're not here. I'm not here to shame someone based on their coping mechanism. The
Right.
brain knows what it knows. And when you have to relearn and redig neural pathways that have been in your life for years, it's painful. That W word, that thing we go through called withdrawals,
Hmm.
that's where the rubber meets the road. And a lot of us, when it comes to recovery, or when we go through some sort of coaching, we're ready to level up. When you go through withdrawals and you make it past that, that's when you know you're about your business.
So can you do this here? I'm gonna give you a scenario. You tell me if you can do it or not. Obviously, I don't want any specific person or whatnot, but an
Well, we're
example
not going to
of,
violate any legal
of course,
anything legal here.
an example of someone that came in, and again, nothing specific, where they were when they came in, where they were when they came out after your 12-week program. What's the progress? What's the difference? What did they leave with?
Well, it's weird. Some of them actually leave with their physical health more intact. I had a client who they were actually struggling with their gut health, but it was due to the stress. And so all the stress of business, the stress of home, the stress of marriage, business was not, so much failing, but it wasn't booming because they didn't have the energy to direct it.
Hmm.
Um, there was so much stress going on subconsciously. And so actually we improved their mental health, we improved their physical health, we improved their business health. We also improved their marriage health. So holistically, this person actually leaves firing on all cylinders. Another client who they were so trapped in their own mind based on, because pandemic wise, a lot of people got jobs during the pandemic. And we hear the extrovert, introvert word. That stuff can drive me crazy. And they're a little bit more on the introverted side. Certainly nothing wrong with that. They had an opportunity to go to a company summit that they didn't even want to attend because of their own insecurities. And, they had some cultural thing going on and gender wise, like, well, how am I going to be able to do this, amongst all these big high price CEOs that may think a certain way. And so
Hmm.
we actually got to the root of their subconscious thinking, why they're thinking this, what are the narratives that have been handed to them since they were a little boy, a little girl? What have they taken and run with and developed, which we would call a defense mechanism? They're in survival
Hmm.
mode.
Hmm.
And so isolating that for the better part of 8, 9 weeks, I said, okay, if you don't go to this, I think it can hurt you. It can hurt your
Hmm.
career. They decided to go. And our last session, we just celebrated for a whole hour all the things that happened because they went. If they weren't there, it wouldn't have power positioned them with the CEOs, with the CPO, hello, with the CMO. So all these
Right.
chief officers said, I was waiting to see you to come here so I could sit down and talk to you. They were in a sense in their company, they felt like they weren't invited into certain rooms that actually were affecting their job and affecting talent acquisition and human resources. They're now at the table. And so they're actually positioned perfectly in an organization to thrive, not only to level up financially, but also to level up psychologically. Because when you're power positioned, you don't want to go into your job, your profession, or even your business with that doubt. We all have some form of what you call imposter syndrome. But
Hmm.
if you're led by your emotions are going to be the thing that actually takes you under. And it's going to cause you to leave money on the table and also leave opportunity on the table. So clarity for my clients is a huge thing that they leave with. There's some quantifiable results, obviously. There's a lot of qualitative results because I think we know a lot of, I mean, I'm talking to one, the tons of millionaires and billionaires out here. But the sense of peace and fulfillment that comes from healing and healing the subconscious, those are the things you want to take to the grave with you. So not only is there a quantifiable result and a tangible result in your health, but there can also be a result in your money. So
Let me ask you this. You said something that triggered me a little bit when you talked about gut health. It's funny, what is it? Your gastroenterologist, whatever that word is. He said to me one day, I've had stomach issues, gut issues for years. Either people live in their mind, but it comes out in their gut, which is weird to
Hmm.
me. So when you said that, I wanted you to see if you could expand on that or any experiences you've had with it.
The experience I've had with some clients
Keep, yeah, they who have had
is,
gut health problems, but it's really their mental issue that causes it.
yeah, it's if you think about like childhood us and the different traumatic events, and some of us say, well, I haven't been through anything traumatic. There's still events for your audience and my audience that you have been through that you've never processed that have stockpiled. And
Hmm.
that in itself ends up being something that's traumatic. And so that mountain or that molehill has turned into a mountain for you. And
Hmm.
that mountain for you is the very thing that you project and you push forward because that's the thing that's protecting you. It's nothing to be ashamed of. You only know what you know. And because your
Say that again.
mind
Wait,
is
wait, say that again. You said it, you're so much in what you said. I want to hear it again.
the very thing you put in front of you. And
Yeah.
that is the very thing that protects you. That's the thing that you lead with because it defends you.
What do you
Our
mean? The
brain is
mountain you put in
wired.
front of you protects you. That's where I'm trying to clearly understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, and so it could be our work ethic. It could be our drive. It could be the way that we function around people, the way we are professionally, the way we are personally, the way
Your
we
identity.
react instead of the way we respond. You know,
Okay.
that's that very mountain of these are the things I haven't processed, but this is the way I've learned to protect myself.
So
Or
I
this is
look
the
at that as the
narrative.
identity that you put out to the public
Hmm.
is what you use to protect yourself with. This is who I am.
Yeah,
Don't mess with me.
that's it.
Which might not be who you really are.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so that very quote unquote altered ego is the very thing that where your mind would normally, let's just give a number, is supposed to function or move at 70%. You're moving at 700%. And so it's like,
Hmm.
man, why am I tired now? It's like you've literally turned yourself into Doctor Strange. You're trying to figure out all these outcomes that you have no control over. And so for said person, my job is to actually take them off autopilot and to put them on purpose. And how is that affecting the gut? You know, it's not only our psychology. I often say, and I think I said on the podcast when you came on, the mind is a control tower to the body, but the heart also informs the mind. And so the funny thing is when your mental health is in a good place, it affects your biology.
What happens after 12 weeks? You're not
12
solving
weeks is,
everybody's problems in 12 weeks.
yeah, that's the truth. It's weird. With some people, they latch on, they go for it, they go through the process. Some people like Jamal, I need to see you for the full 6 months. The first 12 weeks, I actually take them through and we actually dig into the text, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. That's one of the main books that I coach through, and we actually live in there together, but I develop a whole acumen for them during our
Right.
time together. Uh, and then the second one, I believe execution is important. How do you actually measure results if you're not doing anything? And to me, that's where talk therapy, I think, can fall in its face when you're just kind of sitting around talking. And so we actually go through James Clear's Atomic Habits. It's like, how do we then atomically, bit by bit, develop a foundation where this becomes a way of life?
Okay. Well, that brings up the question then, what are your favorite three books? I'm guessing one is Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, and number two is The Atomic Habits. What else?
That would be number three. Number one is the Bible.
Okay, fair enough. I'm writing these down. Okay. All right. We are actually running out of time. We're at 45-minute mark here. So if you were going to leave this audience with something that you want them to hear, something that you want them to know, something that you think would help them, what would you say?
I'm going to give them an actual quote that I've coined and trademarked. Um, and it's a pattern remains a pattern until it's disrupted.
I wrote that down. Pattern remains a pattern until it's disrupted. We have to first identify the pattern,
That's it.
identify that it's a negative pattern,
Hmm.
and then figure out how to disrupt that pattern, and finally figure out how to not get back into the pattern. Disrupting it's easy.
That's it. Yeah. Once you disrupt, then you have to go through the withdrawals and then you get back on track because withdrawals will happen. Expect withdrawals, you know, especially when the brain and the body have functioned a certain way for, let's say, 40 plus years.
Hmm.
I've been on this planet nearly 40 years. There's a reason why I had to go away for so long. It's like, Jamal, you've been doing this for a really long time.
Hmm.
And now you're going through withdrawals. And when you go through withdrawals, I want your audience to hear this. It is very easy to go back into survival mode and to do whatever you can to feel safe.
Pattern remains a pattern until you disrupt it. That's a good way to end this. Jamal, I appreciate you being on the podcast with me today, my friend.
Brian, thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. That's it for this week's episode of the Dropout Multimillionaire. Jamal, how do they get a hold of you if they wanted to?
It's easy to find me. I'm the only Jamal Marshall on LinkedIn, like literally on the whole planet.
Well, let's do
Uh,
JAHM two A's L.
That's it.
Marshall. Jamal
My
Marshall. Go
yep,
ahead.
my website is www.listenthenSpeak.com. And also at the top of my profile is my top mate link. And I also have a mindset master method that I'm running right now. And so we'll drop all those links in the show notes. That way they can get a hold of me and get in touch with me.
That's awesome. Jamal, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you would like to get more information on either one of my books or my one-on-one coaching programs, you can find me at brianwillmedia.com or thedropoutmm.com.